So I'm Madhub Gulati. I'm in vSphere product management team. My team is responsible for a lot of the vCenter lifecycle pieces from product management side. I have with me Mohan Potheri. He's the solution architect on vCenter side. So hopefully we'll be together able to address a lot of the questions we have been hearing from you guys. How was the party yesterday night? How many people thought both the bands were great? Yeah, so thank you for attending it on Thursday. I know it's the last day, so thanks for joining. So let's get started. There will be a few parts of the presentation where I'm going to talk about what's beyond 6.0, for the future. So some of those pieces would be tech preview pieces as well towards the end of the presentation. So our main agenda is we're going to start with, why is high availability important? I think most of you kind of think it is important, but we're going to just spend a few minutes talking about what we have heard from customers in terms of why vCenter availability is important. Then we'll get into what are the 6.0 options for availability, and we're going to cover different options that are available today with 6.0 and 6.0 U1. And then we're going to get into some of the tech preview items for what we are working on for the future, some of the concepts there, etc. So let's get started. Why is vCenter availability important? Here are a few reasons we have heard from customers. One of them obviously is vCenter is the primary console for getting visibility into your ESX and environment, and so if it's down, you lose your visibility, so you don't know what's going on. So that's the number one reason. The other reason we have heard is a lot of customers are putting provisioning and cloud frameworks on top of vCenter. You might have some homegrown provisioning framework, or you might be using VRA, vRealize Automation, or VROps. So all these other solutions rely on vCenter to be available, because a lot of them use vCenter APIs. So if vCenter is down, you essentially don't have your cloud available, right? A lot of users are not administrators, but they're business users, they're line of business users who are actually accessing these self-service cloud portals. So you don't want the users to see that the system is not available for them to provision their dev environments when they need to, right? The other thing we've heard is around VDI. So how many of you here have VMware VDI solution, the virtual desktop? Right. So VDI, the Horizon View, also relies on vCenter for a lot of the provisioning operations. So again, if vCenter is down, you don't have access to your desktops. And lastly, backup, right? So how many of you have backup solutions which actually rely on VADP or snapshot-based backups? A lot of you, right? And essentially that goes through vCenter for taking snapshots of your entire ESX or VM environment. So if vCenter is not available, your backup is not available. And if backup is not available, then you're compromising on your disaster recovery strategy, right? So it becomes very critical to make sure vCenter is available. And over the years, we are seeing that the role of vCenter is becoming more important, more critical. So earlier, people used to look at it as just an administrative interface. But as I'm saying, with with more private clouds being deployed, we are seeing that vSphere, vCenter is becoming the center of that universe. And so it's important that it's highly available. So what does high availability mean, right? So if you think of it as a trade-off between the number of outages that you can tolerate and the recovery time for those outages, then you can see that you can get to a certain level of availability. Our target is to have at least 4 nines of availability for vCenter, right? 4 or 5 nines of availability. And all these scenarios give you 4 nines of availability, but they differ in how many outages we are talking per year and what is the recovery time. So for example, let's take the third last row, right? If you had to have vCenter go down every month, then that means you should be able to recover within 4.3 minutes. Only then you get the 4 nines of availability, right? And if it has to go down only once a year, then yes, you have a little bit more time for recovery. You can do up to 50 minutes, right? So it's something to keep in mind as you think about your vCenter availability is what is my RTO? What is my recovery time objective, right? Sometimes your users might expect, hey, I'm a self-service user, and if I'm provisioning VMs, I want to make sure that, if it goes down, it should be up within 30 minutes, let's say, right? And so that gives you an indication on what RTO expectations your users have. So it's something to definitely look at when you think of vCenter availability. The other piece to think about is availability of the entire stack, right? So vCenter availability is not just about the vCenter being available, but it's about everything below it being available. So you have to make sure that the infrastructure on which vCenter is running is highly available. So for example, I'm sure you guys take care of availability at the network side, on the storage side. On network, for example, you have to make sure there's NIC teaming. You have to make sure there is redundant network paths, redundancy in switches. So a lot of it is already done, but sometimes the vCenter, we don't think of it as in terms of which application is running in that environment, right? So if it's vCenter, you have to make sure the network, the storage is truly highly available. On the storage side, you might consider having your multipath settings done right, have high levels of RAID on your disk, right? So and maybe have redundant controller heads on the storage side. So there are things you can do to make sure that the lower layers are at least 4 nines, if not more, of availability. So this session, we are going to focus on the top half, right? Host availability. What does that mean? And then look at application availability itself. What does it mean to make sure vCenter services, the database, is highly available? So one of the tenets of improving availability is to reduce the dependencies. The less the dependencies of components, the higher the availability because there are fewer failure points, right? So one thing we've done is going from a 5.5 to 6.0, you can see there is a consolidation of services. So a lot of vCenter services such as inventory service, web client, etc., that you could run on different machines before, now in 6.0 we require you to run it all together as one vCenter VM or one vCenter machine, because we don't want individual services to be point of failure. If it's in a different VM in a different stack, that could fail independently, right? So we want it to be together as one vCenter. So from 5.5 to 6.0, you can see essentially we have consolidated into 2 pieces. One is the vCenter node in 6.0, which has all the vCenter services, and then there's the platform services controller, the PSC node, which has the single sign-on server. It has the licensing service. It has tagging and some of the certificate management aspects built into the platform services controller. So essentially now we have 2 nodes to take care of and make sure those 2 nodes are highly available. How many people attended the security session? There was a SSO PSC security session. Okay, a few did, okay. So what about the database itself, right? Again, we think of vCenter. vCenter database is obviously very critical, and we have to make sure that that is protected also. With 5.5 and 6.0, we had supported the SQL Server, the failure cluster, the failover cluster instances. So that is the technology that we have had for a while from Microsoft, and we have supported that in 5.5, 6.0. There was a request to also support always availability groups, which is a new concept that Microsoft introduced in 2012, SQL Server 2012. And so we also have support for that in the future releases. So 6.0 U1, which is going to be out anytime this year, should be will be supporting SQL Server 2014, always availability groups. How many of here are thinking of moving to SQL Server 2014? 2014. Okay, so few of you. So that will be available. And then for those who are still on 5.5, want to move to 5.5 U3, we are we are planning to support this as well. So let's go over what are the options available in 6.0 for making sure this entire stack is highly available. If you have questions, you can use the mic. So we are happy to take questions as we go. We will try to keep time towards the end for questions as well.
So let's talk about all the availability options out there. So the first thing I want to ask is, how many of you use vSphere HA for your vCenter? Pretty much quite a few. How about fault tolerance? Okay. So these are like, this is the list of, this is like the bullet list of all the availability solutions that are available. We'll go over them one by one. And, each of them provide different levels of availability. You can combine them based on your requirements, right? And so we'll first look at vSphere HA, right? So vSphere HA is something that we've been supporting for a long time, and so it's a very time-tested solution. Most customers have vSphere HA, and if you make your vCenter into a VM and you put it on a cluster that has vCenter HA, you're automatically protected, right? So first thing I want to talk about in vCenter HA is that when you think about vSphere HA, there is some downtime. What does vSphere HA protect you against? Hardware failure. Let's say vCenter is running on a particular server and the server goes down. There's some downtime for the HA framework to detect the failure and restart the VM on a second node. And then all the services have to come up. So with vSphere HA, there is downtime for any hardware failure, but it is kind of very easy to set up, and it's there by default in most cases. The other thing about vSphere HA is that we can also leverage DRS. You can leverage DRS to make sure that, let's say there's a major failure, we want to make sure that the restart priority for the vCenter server itself is high, so that's one of the first things that comes up after a failure, right? How many of you want to use fault tolerance for vCenter? All right. So let's look at, so with vSphere 6, we have 4 vCPU fault tolerance. Before we used to have only 1 vCPU fault tolerance, and with 1 vCPU, there's not many workloads that used to fit. But with 4 vCPU fault tolerance, so let's talk about what is fault tolerance, right? So fault tolerance is where you have 2 VMs running in lockstep. What does that mean? Let's say you have a very critical application that you want to protect with fault tolerance. There are 2 instances running on 2 different hardware in lockstep. Every transaction happening on the first machine happens on the second machine. The CPU, memory, disk are separate for each of them. So there is isolation in that sense. Because they are running in lockstep, if a hardware fails, like in the case of, we talked about vSphere HA. In vSphere HA, when the hardware failed, the vCenter had to move over. In the case of fault tolerance, since there are 2 things running at the same time, there's an instantaneous cutover. There's no data loss or transaction loss. So the second server immediately takes over in the event of a failure. And also not only that, once there's a failure, clone is instantiated for the standby becomes the primary, and since the primary has disappeared, a clone is immediately instantiated on another server so that the protection continues, right? So there are some caveats still, right? There are some caveats with vCenter server. What are those caveats, right? It's only 4 vCPU or less, right? And so if you look at vCenter server, the sizing guidelines, only the tiny and the small vCenter servers fit in that. So if you want to protect your vCenter server, you're limited by that, right? And then the other aspect is you're not protected against application failures. So application failure is in the sense if there's something inside the vCenter that fails, fault tolerance doesn't protect you against. And the last but not the least, vCenter is a very memory intensive application. So it's the beast that it is not necessarily the best application to run on fault tolerance. The reason being there's a 20% overhead. But if you 20% overhead, but if you really require really instantaneous protection against hardware failure, and if you fit all these conditions that are out there, then fault tolerance can absolutely be used, right? And then again, there is also downtime during OS patching. What does that mean, right? So, for example, if you're running your vCenter on Windows and you need to patch Windows, usually patching requires that you reboot the OS after maintenance, the patch has been updated, right? So vCenter application has to go down. So, but that means it's a planned downtime, but it doesn't necessarily fault tolerance. Even though there are two things running, both of them have to come down during the patch cycle, right? So the next thing is, if you look at vCenter itself, right? It used to be that sometimes there used to be some failures within the vCenter application. vCenter has a lot of components inside it, like inventory services, web services, and all those that used to be individually existing now has been consolidated, but still there are a lot of individual services running inside vCenter. So we wanted to make it very resilient. Right? So we have something called the Watchdog. The Watchdog is there in both the vCenter for Windows and the appliance versions, and it's enabled by default. So what Watchdog does is, it's for every critical service there is a separate watchdog monitoring that service behind the scenes. So in the event that you have any kind of failure of any of those services, Watchdog is restarting it for you or doing some remedial action for you. So it has made the vCenter services pretty resilient. So what we've seen in the field with vCenter 6 is that a lot of the failures we used to see in the past have reduced dramatically because of the Watchdog, right? So this gives you application level availability. Watchdog is kind of the mechanism in both the appliance and in Windows to give you that kind of availability, right? So now, if you want to take it a little bit further, right? You want to, one of the use cases I mentioned was OS patching, right? You want to be able to protect against downtime for OS patching. So how do you do that, right? So we support Microsoft Windows Server Failover Clustering with vCenter. So you can potentially set up your product primary and a standby for your vCenter. And in the event that you needed to do some patching, you could actually do a rolling patch upgrade where you can patch your secondary first, then when you want to patch your primary server, you fail over your vCenter instance to the standby, patch it, and then bring it back. There is downtime when you fail over, but it's much less than downtime associated with an individual just having no primary and a standby. Let's say if you have only one node, the entire node has to come down and the vCenter is down for the entire time that the patching happens. If you have guest OS clustering, that it protects you against that, right? And the other important component we discussed was the database. The database also needs to be highly available. If it's since it's where all the majority of the data for vCenter resides. So similar, we had mentioned that we have protection with SQL failover cluster instances. We leverage that to protect our SQL Server database. Always on, as we mentioned, is supported in future versions, which is 6.0 U1 that's coming up shortly, and then also 5.5 U3, which is the next update to 5.5. Right? So now that we've seen all these different availability options, let's look at when to use what, right? So what do customers mainly use, right? So if you look at it, for majority of our customers, vSphere HA does its job. Majority of the failures they see are hardware related. vSphere HA is simple to set up and maintain, and it's very trustworthy. So most customers use vSphere HA. And since Watchdog is there inside the vCenter already protecting all the application level stuff, you have good protection against hardware failures as well as application level failures, right? And then if you go down the stack, the level of complexity and the cost increases if you go down these different options. But the availability also increases. For example, if you take the bottom where you have vSphere HA plus a guest failover cluster, then you actually increasing the number of nines because you reduce your downtime from patch maintenance and other things. So like while the top one is suitable for most people, when there are customers who require very like 5.9 kinds of availability, you probably have to layer a guest failover cluster on top of vSphere. Currently, I just want to mention that the clustering option exists only for the Windows. In the future tech preview that Madhup will be showing, that we are going to having the appliance also have those features, right? So now let's go look at platform services controller. So the second component in the vCenter is the platform services controller. How do you make the platform services controller highly available, right? So the platform services controller, there are two different deployment models, right? The first one is the embedded, and the second one is the external. So okay, what is the embedded? Embedded is, when do you use embedded? Embedded you use when there is a simple deployment. You have one vCenter and one PSC. There's nothing else talking to the vCenter or the PSC, right? So if you have multiple solutions like View and other things, you would use an external PSC because you want something external to the vCenter if there's more than one thing talking to the PSC. So depending on how the requirements are for your customer, for your particular data center, you would use either embedded or external. Majority of the customers tend to have to use external because if there's more than one thing, you need to use external, right? So, and one thing about PSC is that PSC, you can have more than one instance. Compared to vCenter, which is just one of a kind, PSC does inbuilt replication. So all the state data from one PSC is replicated among all the PSCs in the domain. So we have a concept called a single sign-on domain, and the PSC that belong to a particular domain, all those PSCs are in sync all the time. So if you want availability for a PSC, it's not too hard to do. You don't need to do any kind of clustering. You need load balancing. So what you would have is two PSCs in a local site that are replicating within each other, and then you have a load balancer that separates that from all the vCenter type solutions that talk to the PSC. So by doing that, you can see that it interacts with the PSCs through the load balancer, and the state information is always being replicated. Let's say one of the PSCs go down, the other one takes over, the load balancer sees that the PSC went down and it's going to redirect all the traffic to the second one. And then that way you have availability from a local sense. Now let's put all of these together, right? Let's say you want high availability for your PSC and you want high availability for your vCenter. So this is and you have multiple sites. Let's say you have 3 different sites, Los Angeles, New York, and Miami in this situation. You would have PSCs that are highly available with replication and load balancing, then you have vCenters that are clustered. So by doing this kind of a redundant methodology, you are protected across the board. And also you're able to replicate all the information across multiple sites. What you see in Los Angeles is the same you see in New York or Miami. So all the information regarding users, roles, licenses, all those components get replicated through the PSC. So it kind of talks about what I just said. So now the last topic I'm going to talk about is vCenter backup. So like now that we have a new architecture with a centralized vCenter server node and a platform services controller, how do we back it up, right? So the first thing we look at is for embedded, right? We can back up both embedded and external PSC configurations. Okay, so with the PSC, you can also recover from failures. There are 2 ways you can do this, right? So let's say you have an external PSC, okay, and your PSC went down. You would first recover your PSC, and then you would recover your vCenter server. vCenter server goes down if the PSC goes down. And let's say you have multiple PSCs. Let's say a PSC goes down. You can initially probably point your vCenter to manually point your PSC. Let's say you don't have a load balancer. You can manually point your vCenter to the existing of the PSC that's running while you recover the PSC that went down. You recover, and once the PSC that went down comes back up, it does a sync up with the PSC that's alive, and then it comes to the same state as the PSC that's alive, and then you can repoint your vCenter back to the original PSC. So that's kind of how you would recover. So here we show you we support the VADP protocol, which is all the vendors like NetBackup, Commvault, and others that support VADP can leverage that to back up vCenter services. And then out of the box, we also support VDP. So we can schedule backups with VDP, and you can manage backups with VDP, and that comes free with our product. Right? And so we're just showing you here some screenshots on how VDP is integrated into the vSphere client, web client. And then here you see that you can create backup jobs for your vCenter server and the PSC, the management node and the PSC. And then here we are showing you how we back up an external PSC. We can choose the VMs corresponding to it, and then we back it up. It's very simple. And then you can this also shows you how you do a restore, right? You have backups that have happened, and then now you want to restore from it, and you're kind of pointing to the image that you want to use for your restore, and then you're restoring your PSC there. So now I'll give it back to Madhup,
Sure.
who'll talk about the tech preview.
Thanks, Mohan. So what we talked about were the options that are available in 6.0, right, for high availability. And as we said, there are 3 things to protect. You have the PSC to protect, the vCenter to protect, and the database to protect. And we have options available for protecting all the 3 pieces so that your entire vCenter environment is highly available. But the options we discussed, they give you a certain level of recovery time objective, right? So let's say you want to recover vCenter in 30 minutes or an hour or a couple hours, then depending on the inventory size, these options could help you with that. But then for some customers, they're looking for recovery times to be much shorter. What if I want my vCenter to be back up within like 15 minutes? Because I cannot tolerate more than that failure for a time longer than that. So what do you do for that? So in the next release, we are looking at options, certain concepts on how we can give you high availability, which is natively built into vCenter, and that can give you better recovery time for vCenter. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit on the direction going forward. So the current solutions, if you think about what are the challenges with the current solutions, of course, recovery time is not very low, right? With vSphere HA, with guest OS clustering, any of the options we discussed, you essentially still need 30 minutes to an hour or more sometimes to recover. So we need to go down. Some of the solutions rely on third-party software, right? So how many of you here used Heartbeat? Heartbeat used to be, yes, a few of you used Heartbeat, which was our HA solution before, where we OEM'd a third-party solution, and we have discontinued that because we don't want to have reliance on third-party, because sometimes it doesn't work or sometimes there's support issues, right? Also, one of the options for guest OS clustering was around Microsoft cluster services. Again, that's a third-party, and it's maybe tedious to set up for some of our customers. So we want to have a native solution. Lastly, PSC high availability requires a load balancer, and sometimes it's not very convenient to set up a load balancer. It's very tedious, and so we have heard from customers who are looking for a solution that doesn't require a load balancer, right? So for all these reasons, we have been thinking about coming up with a better solution. The other thing to think about, I was talking about to you earlier about how availability of vCenter depends on the availability of the entire stack. And here is an example, right? If you had availability of 4 nines at every level, if you multiply that, you still get only 3 nines, right, at the overall vCenter level. That means, availability has to be much higher at lower levels if you need 4 nines at the vCenter level, right? Because it actually gets multiplied, the probability of each one failing, right? And so what can you do? The best you can do with data center availability or per site availability is 3 nines. So what can I do to make it better than 3 nines? The best thing you can do is put another site or another stack, right? And that's the idea behind the active-passive solution I'm going to talk about. So whenever you have 2 systems, let's say, and both of them are 99% available, when you put them together as a redundant system, you actually double your availability, right? So from 2 nines, you go to 4 nines. For those who are interested in the math, you go from 2 nines to 4 nines whenever you put a spare part. And that's the idea behind NIC teaming. That's the idea behind having redundant paths. And that's the idea behind our sort of thinking beyond 6.0, which is we should have a redundant stack for giving availability. And that means the proposal is have an active vCenter which has the best availability you can get, but then have another vCenter as a passive node so that you can double the nines, right? And that's a pretty standard way of sort of improving availability in the industry. So nothing here should be very surprising. And this configuration, basically what we are thinking is would be active vCenter, passive vCenter, and would require a witness. And this witness is essentially a quorum VM that helps us detect when the failure happens automatically. So it's for automatic failure detection. And essentially each VM has its own IP, right? Its own sort of, I'm calling it private IP, but here private doesn't mean it's 192 dot something IP. Private just means it's not internet routable, right? So each of them have a private IP, and then there's a public IP on the active that is being used by the clients to connect, right? Whether it's a web client, VROps, VRA, or any other client. So essentially what we want is when the failure happens, we want that failure to be detected automatically and the failover to happen so that the passive becomes the active and the public IP moves to the passive so that the clients continue to see vCenter as the same vCenter. So let's simulate that scenario. Let's say active fails. So what happens is this passive becomes the active and the IP address moves, and then the clients can connect to the other vCenter, right? What happens when the passive fails, right? So let's start with the, and by the way, when the active has failed, your passive is the active, but still it's in degraded protection mode. That means if another failure were to happen, there is no protection, right? Because the active is down, you have vCenter up and running, but the protection is not there for this vCenter. So it's important to quickly set up another node and make that the passive for this vCenter so that you enable protection again. Let's take a scenario where you have an active vCenter, it's running fine. What happens when the passive fails, right? When the passive fails, there's no problem with the active vCenter. It's still running, right? It's still available. Clients can still connect. But the only thing you lose is the protection. So if passive is gone, you're not protected anymore. And so it's very important for you to quickly set up another passive so that active is protected. So that's the case where your passive fails, right? So let's take the third scenario, which is the witness fails, right? So what happens when the witness fails? The active is still working. You can still connect to the active. vCenter is fine. But you have lost protection because now without the witness, we cannot detect the failure, because the whole purpose of having the witness was when there are 3 people, if one person is not there, the other 2 can decide if the third is there or not there. So it's just the standard quorum requirement. So when the witness is not there, we are not able to determine if the active fails, we won't be able to determine it failed. So that's why you are basically in the protection is lost for the active node. Active is still available, just degraded protection. You're not protected. You have to quickly set up another witness and get back to the level of protection. So those are kind of the 3 modes. And this is a sort of a proposal that we are working on. And this would be native, as in it will be available with vCenter itself. You don't have to install any third-party software, or you don't need to worry about having other components outside of what we provide. So what are the benefits of this approach, right? No third-party components required. Recovery in minutes, not hours. So one thing we are really working hard on is when vCenter failover happens and a new vCenter starts, we want the restart times to be very fast. So we are looking at optimizing restart for inventory service, restart for other services, and make sure that that comes down to a few minutes. Only then we can do the full failover and restart for the entire vCenter in minutes. So that's one thing we're working on. The overall target is to have around 15 minutes of recovery time with the full vCenter. The other good thing about this solution is it's application aware, right? So unlike vSphere HA, fault tolerance, or a lot of the other solutions in the market, they only protect against host and hardware failure, and they're not aware of the application. In this case, it's unlike, we are not doing replication at the storage level. We are doing replication at the application level between the active and the passive. And that means if there are any failures that happen in the vCenter itself, we can detect it and we can tag it as, oh, VPXD is down. That means vCenter has failed, and that means I need to automatically failover. So it is application-aware solution. No shared storage required. How many of you here think that a high availability solution should not require shared storage? Quite a few of you, and that's the feedback we have gotten with these validations. So for this solution, you do not need shared storage. That also means you can put the active and passive on 2 different sites, because a lot of times you don't have shared storage across sites, right? And even if it's the same site, you don't need to have shared storage. And the last but the most important point is we really want the high availability setup to be really quick, easy, and the usability of this should be very, very simple. So that means, we don't want you to go through the whole process of, setting up like the way you do today with Microsoft clustering. It's very tedious to do, some people say, or with Heartbeat, which was our previous solution. Since it was a third party, it required quite a bit of setup, right? So our goal with this native solution is it should be literally a one-click setup. I go to the vCenter that I want to protect, and I say, make it highly available, and it should automatically set up the passive, it should automatically set up the witness and configure the high availability cluster quickly, automatically, right? And then basically have full integration with vCenter itself, so you don't have to download and install any other piece. And and another piece is that this solution we are working for is mainly for the appliance, for the vCenter appliance. So let me go over a demo with you, and it's a tech preview. So let's say I have an active vCenter called demo active. I have another passive, demo passive, that I want to set up. There are 3 VMs, right? And the third VM is called demo witness. So we're going to start with the active vCenter, and I'll show you how the solution works. So I have a vCenter, demo active, and a demo PSC, which is an external PSC. I'm going to run a script, and we're going to make it a button probably in the UI. So you just click that button, and this script automatically sets up HA for the active node. So it will clone the active and create the demo witness. It will clone the active and create the demo passive. So now you have the 3 nodes automatically cloned and created, and your cluster is highly available. Now we're going to go and show you simulation of failure, right? So we're going to fail the active. That means we're going to power off the VM just to show a failure. So I go back and I look at the IP address of the active. It's 227. That's my active vCenter, and I'm going to go power it off. And you will see that when the active goes down, the failure is automatically detected, and the failover happens. So you see you lose connection to a web client because the active has gone down, so web client connection is lost. And after a few minutes, you will see web client is back up because the passive takes over, and the same IP address that we were using before for the active is now transferred to the passive. So the active node is powered off, and the passive is powered on. And if you click on the passive node, you will see the IP address is now 227, which was the IP address of the other node. It's moved automatically. And now you can also connect to your in-web client, and you can connect to the new vCenter, right? So right. So this is still tech preview, right? I wish I could deliver it today, but we have to do more testing to make sure all the different paths work, etc. But this is kind of the direction in which we are headed. So the key takeaways from the session, I'm going to wrap up. This is sort of our last slide. So the key takeaways are, vSphere HA and Watchdog are the primary options today for protecting vCenter. So vSphere HA protects against host and hardware failure, and Watchdog helps you with protection against the application failures. So Watchdog plus vSphere HA is the recommendation. You also have other options for Windows, such as Microsoft clustering, which we discussed, and fault tolerance that we discussed, but this is our primary recommendation. For PSC protection, we talked about using a load balancer and using 2 PSCs for replication, and that can help you protect the PSC itself. So this is for 6.0. Guest OS clustering is tested and is available for customers who are, for those of you who are comfortable with Microsoft clustering or you think you have the skill set, you can even try out Microsoft clustering. But we are definitely exploring native options for high availability for vCenter. So for those of you who can wait a little bit longer, instead of trying out third-party solutions, you can, like Microsoft clustering, you can wait a bit more, and we should have the native solution available in 2016 sometime. So that's the plan. Thank you. There are some resources available. There's a high availability white paper for 5.5 and 6.0, so you can look at that. And there is a discussion on, there's a KB article on the different options as well. So any questions, come to the mic and we can take the questions.
Yeah, so I want to applaud VMware for putting the effort in to make vCenter highly available with it looks like some nice new features. But why not rewrite the thing so it becomes active-active and a truly highly available application? It still kind of looks like it's just going to be 2 vCenter nodes, and there's some trickery in the background to make the other one kind of come online. Why not make it really a truly enabled active-active app?
So when I have talked to people who say I want active-active, right, it turns out that the real problem they're trying to solve is not always availability, but it's the scalability. So they want multiple vCenters, all right, active-active, so that anyone can be used. It helps you with scalability, but availability also. But I think just to solve availability, that is not a must-have. That's how we look at it. It does solve availability, but it's not a must-have. The bigger reason is the way vCenter is architected. If you think about it, it's not a just standard database application where I can have a bunch of stateless mid-tier servers and all the state is in the database, and so I can make all the mid-tier stateless, right, active-active. It is an application where DRS and some of the decision making sits in the vCenter node. So for example, if I have to do DRS a placement of a VM, right, I want to make a decision on which host I should place this VM on. That decision can only be made in one vCenter because only one vCenter has visibility across all those hosts. So if I had like 5 vCenters and they saw a different set of hosts, then that decision cannot be made by one vCenter. All the vCenters need to talk to each other before they can make that decision, and that would slow down DRS, that would slow down the placement algorithm that we have. So I'm not saying we cannot re-architect it to make it work that way, like stateless vCenters, but it's a significant change in the architecture. And so the question is there a benefit to that cost, that significant cost? What's the benefit, right? And we have seen that most customers, when we talk about RTO, what is the recovery time they want? They think that if it's within 15 minutes, it's pretty good. So that's why we feel we don't have to take that a complete change of architecture, because with this active passive, we can deliver that level of RTO that most customers want, which is within 15 minutes. And so the cost of doing that, just the benefit doesn't outweigh the cost of doing that.
Question. So you already have it's actually 2 questions. You already have fault tolerance. Any reason behind that? Of course, I could think of a few reasons, but you had that technology available to you. I was wondering why you're not using it. And you mentioned RTO, but what about RPO of your virtual machine within the data center and across the data center?
Right.
What would that RPO be, and how would you fail back?
Right. So the first question is, why don't we use fault tolerance, right? As we said, there are 3 caveats to using fault tolerance. First is fault tolerance is supported for VMs which are up to 4 vCPU, right? That means vCenter sizing for 4 vCPU is only tiny and small vCenters. If you have any sort of production vCenters, generally they're beyond 4 CPUs. So that's why fault tolerance would not work as a solution. The second reason is that fault tolerance only protects against host and hardware failure, right? It's a hardware protection solution. It cannot see what's inside. It cannot see if vCenter service fails. So it cannot it cannot help you with comprehensive HA for vCenter. It mostly helps you with host and hardware failure. And the third thing to think about is the overhead, right? So vCenter is a very I/O intensive and memory intensive workload. Not all workloads are suitable for FT, but there are other workloads that are great on fault tolerance, right? So with vCenter, we have seen good level of overhead in terms of performance with FT. And so there is a white paper available. We have done quite a bit of testing with vCenter and FT, and we feel there is a performance overhead. So if you're willing to take that 25% overhead, you can use it. But otherwise, that's not the right application for that solution. And the other question you had was around the new solution. I talked about the active passive. What is the RPO? So RPO will be 0, which is there's no loss of data. So the active and passive is replicating at the database level, and it's a sync mode replication. So it's in sync. So there's no loss of data. The requirement is to have a network between active and passive, which is sort of a good level of low latency network, so that we can have the sync and no loss of data.
If you're going to use the Microsoft failover cluster for your availability, is that a single vSphere or vCenter license, or is it two, one for each node, the active and the passive?
Single vCenter license. It's a single vCenter license.
You mentioned a couple different failover scenarios. What would happen if you lost both the active and the witness, and you only had the passive left over? Would the passive be able to promote itself to take over as active?
So this solution, like most solutions in the market, take care of one failure at a time, right? Because if there are two failures and you lose both of them, there's no way for the system to detect the failure, to know that, yes, that's really the case. So one failure at a time.
Gotcha. Sorry, I had one more. Would the solution support a planned migration or a planned downtime if you wanted to take the vCenter down to gracefully move it over to the other side?
That's a great question. And how many people think we should give a manual failover where you do a forced failover in case? Okay, great. So yes, if so many people want it, we'll put that option.
With vCenter becoming more complex and things that are integrating with it, like NSX and some of those configurations, I'm noticing that a lot of components within VMware, when you guys build in the capability to roll back, it's usually an all or nothing thing. Or if you're backing up the whole database, and it's not necessarily unless you're a SQL god or something, it's hard to pull that information in and out. Is VMware working with partners to enable more granular recovery of configuration information, like in a distributed vSwitch or NSX or things like that are changing, so you can recover those settings that could cause a problem, which may not be detected like right now? You may make a change or something and then you have intermittent problems, say for a day, but other configuration changes have been made, but you just want to roll back that one thing and you're not sure what the change may have been. Is there any work in that space?
So from a vCenter perspective, yes, we're not necessarily across the horizon, but from a vCenter, we are trying to build a good life cycle where you can actually roll back. So the appliance, when you upgrade, you can roll back. That's that kind of capability of we're building. When you make changes, you can go back in time. But all solutions put together, it would happen over time, but from a vCenter's perspective, we are providing that capability.
Is there any timetable as far as when to start expecting to see those things?
So let me ask you why you feel this image-based backup that we talked about is not good enough, and why you want that granular control.
For example, if, as a case in point, I make a change on a distributed vSwitch configuration today, I'm working on this network over here. Admin B is working on another network someplace, another distributed vSwitch port group or something like that. Even, let's say, within the same distributed vSwitch, and there's other changes going on.
Right.
NSX may be interacting as well. So you have accumulation of changes, and then suddenly you figure out that, say tomorrow, I started seeing intermittent issues, and we finally figure out maybe or we just want to see maybe it was just that configuration change or something.
Right.
Or say I get fired and my changes, nobody's not exactly sure what I did.
Right.
You want to recover just that configuration change. Right. It's usually with like the distributed vSwitch, it's rolling back the whole thing if you backed it up at the time you made.
Right. So the current thinking is that since we are simplifying the configuration into one appliance, the current thinking is to allow you to do the full appliance backup and restore, so that you don't have to worry about all the little things that are running inside it, whether it's a database or other services, right? So we are thinking of a full backup and restore solution that's available in 6.0U1 that we just talked about today. We are thinking of the file level backup solution, which is export the state, as you're saying, into some other file for individual pieces and bring it back, but that's still kind of in the works, and it's probably medium to longer term. What you can do today is you can use the API, the vCenter API, and export the DVS switch configuration to a file and import it back. So for your specific problem, you can just use the API and do the export.
I understand it's a new architecture with the failover and hard passive standby. How does that play into linked mode vCenters?
So with linked mode vCenter, at one time, if you think about, there's only one vCenter that's, even if it's active passive, the passive is not being seen by the infrastructure. So there'd be no difference. So the passive, when the passive becomes active, it gets seen, but it's that public IP that's the public IP mentioned that moves over, that's part of that linkage. So yeah.
Is it still available with this architectures? My issue is having something in Massachusetts and something in Texas, and the way the network is designed, I can't float that IP across. So I have to have a means to be able to get to vCenter from one or the other site without using the single IP. So I have to tell them to reroute, but I'm just seeing if you can kind of do something with the hard passive standby and still have link mode, or you have to do one or the other.
So I think there is a little bit of confusion here. So you would typically, right, have active passive on within the same site or within a metro area,
yep,
where the IPs are transportable, right? Yes. So if you have sites in Texas and New York, for example, Texas would have its own vCenter. You'd have a standby in Texas, and you'd have a vCenter in New York, which is different. If a vCenter in a particular region goes down, it disappears in link mode as well, and it comes back. So you have to recover from that failure first. So you're not really going across region. The vCenter is not moving anywhere. So that's what you have to understand. So the active passive is local or within a metro region.
Regarding the witness node, you had shown, at least with the initial scripts, that you're deploying a virtual appliance or a virtual machine for the witness. Has there been any thought into having that witness come out into a physical device of some sort?
What is the advantage of doing that?
Third site. So
yeah.
What the other gentleman mentioned, if you've got the two vCenters HA across sites, and you have the witness at pick a site.
Right.
If that site links go down, you
right.
already said you don't, at least today, worry about, if the witness goes down with the node, you're done.
Right. So I thought you were talking about having it on physical, but that's not what you meant. So having it on another site is obviously supported. So you don't have to put the you can put active passive witness on 3 different sites if you're looking for that level of availability, or you can put witness on the same site as the active, in which case, of course, if that site fails, you would lose both. So there's nothing in the architecture that prevents you from that. You can put it in 3 sites.
Okay, so if you were to just do it at the 2 sites, and I assume hopefully some of the input will be that if you do lose that site, witness is gone, then we can not only do a manual failover potentially, but at the DR site, when we know the main site's down, we can make the backup primary.
Yes, so your main role of the witness is for us to detect failure automatically. So if your witness is down and the active is down, and and we'll give you an alert on the passive that, hey, active is gone away. If we know, in this case we won't know. So, but you as an admin can see, hey, I lost active and witness, or the data center is gone. You can manually then make the passive as your active. So it's nothing.
Okay, and the last clarification. So I've got 3 sites today, 2 of which have virtualization, the 3rd does not. I don't plan to put any out there. So that would be an ideal solution for me to be able to put some sort of physical device out there. That would be the witness box.
Currently, there's no plan to support that because this is for the appliance, and all 3 VMs are essentially deployed with the appliance.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about, well, I wasn't sure. First of all, this implementation of having active passive failover and a vCenter VM is not currently available, right? It's in the next release?
Yes. So we talked about all the options that are available today. This active passive native vCenter availability option is for the next release.
Next release.
It was a tech preview.
So similar to the update manager being in the Postgres database, they're talking about that being in.
Yeah,
so I guess it's all going to be part of that release.
That's right. So we are making, as I've talked about in the appliance session, we are making appliance better and better, and we're trying to make update manager into the appliance, and we're also adding other options like high availability for the appliance.
Okay, so then the only question I have is, in like any Microsoft cluster or a SQL cluster, when you have a cluster, basically you have an active node, a passive node, and a witness. The witness in Microsoft can be either a disk, it can be a machine, or it can be a file share witness. Are you supporting file share witnesses like a NAS? What's the witness? What can the witness be? Is my question.
Almost always across the board, we are hearing customers saying, I do not want shared storage. I don't want the quorum to sit on a disk or any common shared storage. And that's why this architecture does not require you to have that common shared disk or storage. What this does is it uses a VM as a witness. So,
so you have to spin up another VM just to be the witness?
Yes, that's right.
You don't have, it's deployed as part of the configuration. You don't have to.
It's automatically deployed, right? We saw the setup in the.
Yes.
So you don't have to set it up, but it's another VM. Yes, it's automatically set up, but it's another VM.
Okay, and last question: as far as if you're going to have your database embedded, your Postgres database is embedded into your vCenter appliance, you're talking about replication of the Postgres between the two.
That's right.
Appliances. Okay.
That's right, and it's not just Postgres. We are replicating the entire appliance. That means Postgres, any configuration files that are for the services, even the SSO and PSC state in terms of your users, groups, everything.
That's what I've been waiting for. Thank you.
Sure.
Along the lines of shared storage again, as far as the options that are available today, I noticed a lot of the recommendations were for utilizing HA, which of course involves shared storage. Are there any recommendations from VMware as far as vCenter high availability to protect yourself from a total SAN failure?
You want to take that?
Which we actually experienced a couple years ago.
So I would say backup and recovery right now. That's your only real protection, and hopefully the backup's not on your SAN.
Yes.
And fault tolerance can protect you against that because fault tolerance can go across 2 storage locations. So, but fault tolerance got other problems, so other issues with it.
With those caveats.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, so what happens, so does that mean the PSC is now going to be back embedded within the vCenter server? How's the PSC become highly available? Is it still load balancer or?
It's not load balancer, it is what happens, are you talking about the future? Yeah, so we would take the requirement for load balancer away, but what happens is you would have multiple PSCs in a particular site and across sites, and there'll be locality, but based on locality, vCenters can talk to one of them which is local to them. So it's kind of, and if the local one goes down, they probably talk to one.
Right. So as Mohan said, right, that logic will be, we are planning to bring that logic into vCenter itself. So you don't need the load balancer. vCenter itself has affinity to a PSC, and if it fails, that PSC fails, it automatically affines to another PSC.
So we're going back to the embedded model.
It's not necessarily embedded. It's a PSC level here.
Whether you have embedded PSC or external PSCs is an orthogonal question, right? This is about how do you make the external PSC highly available. And today we have the load balancer which does the redirection, and we're saying we'll bring the redirection logic into vCenter itself so that it can do the redirection. Yeah, but it still supports external PSC mode.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thanks, great presentation. So my vCenter right now for my servers is it's HA, but we don't have a lot of thing. For VDI, it's totally redundant. So I think that was a great point that you guys made. My real question was about the web client. I know there's been a lot of enhancements. There was a whole session on it. does VMware at some point will drop the client and force us to the web client? I tried to get into the session, but there was such a line.
Sure. So the deprecation for C# client was already announced a couple of years ago. So yes, the plan is to get away from C# client and get to web client. We are just seeing when customers feel comfortable doing that in a big way, right? So we are seeing more and more customers move to web client, and with Update Manager now, with 6.0 U1, Update Manager UI available in web client would be, I think, a huge pivot point for customers to move to web client. So eventually, when we have a level of adoption that we want, then we will completely take away the C#
So there's
client.
no announcements to get rid of the client today?
As I said, the announcement was already done 2 years ago, saying we want to deprecate C# client, get away from it. Already done. That's
There are
like
a lot of features that are missing in the.
there were few
C#
features that were missing, so people used both, and we are bringing those features here. So yes, it can go away. It can go away in the next release because the deprecation announcement is done anyway.
Right. So with 6.1, can I still use the client?
Yes, for 6.1.
Well, 6 update 1.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, 6.0 update 1. All the updates. In updates, we never do major changes.
Okay.
So updates will continue to support it. It's
But
the
maybe
next release,
6.1.
whatever that version is called.
Thank you.
So we asked to wrap up. So last question.
Just want to piggyback off the last gentleman's question with the PSC replication. So if you choose to use the embedded PSC, how does that get covered as far as the high availability, or do you have to have an external PSC?
So embedded PSC and external PSC, the only reason to use external PSC, there are two reasons. One is if you want enhanced linked mode. If you want linked mode, then you need to use external PSC. The other reason is if you want PSC high availability. So if you want to turn on high availability for PSC, you need to use external PSC. Because the embedded PSC does not support replication, and that's why you cannot get linked mode and cannot get high availability option for the PSC.
It's only for like a small local site.
Yeah, and that's what I have. I just have a small site where
For
I'm using
small-
the VCSA.
for
Will that sole appliance be able to replicate with this tech?
Yeah, my suggestion is to always use embedded unless you have these two things, two requirements, which is you really care about linked mode and you really care about protecting your PSC or SSO node. Okay. If you don't care about it, then use embedded.
And that's the PSC outside of the.
No, embedded has PSC built into that same VM.
Okay.
Thank you.
Last question. Yeah.
So in that case, for a two-site scenario, you'd have one vCenter with an embedded PSC and another vCenter in the other site with an embedded PSC, and sort of do it all that way?
As I said, if it's embedded PSC, there's no replication.
Yeah.
So then there are two independent sites doing their own thing.
Yeah, right. So it's got to be, so you'd have would you do the PSC then HA across the two sites? Just so one half of it.
As I said, if you want PSC HA, you cannot have embedded mode.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So do it external.
Yes.
But so have one PSC on one site, one PSC on the other, and then they can talk across the area.
Yes. Replication across sites is supported over WAN.
Is it better to do it that way, or to have HA in both sites as well? Like, would you just do it one site, one site?
Let's take it offline.
Yeah.
Let's take it offline. Thank you, guys. Thanks.